Kate Middleton is routinely presented as the most popular royal of her generation, universally adored, effortlessly relatable, quietly powerful, and instinctively loved by the masses, which is a fascinating reputation to uphold considering how consistently her projects land with all the excitement of a pamphlet left on a dentist's waiting room table, because if popularity were truly reflected in curiosity, engagement, or public momentum, the results would be far louder and far harder to ignore. And yet time after time, initiatives arrive, wrapped in soft lighting, carefully chosen coats, solemn handshakes, and reassuring headlines, declaring significance only for the public response to amount to a polite nod, followed by complete and total amnesia. And this is where the humour practically writes itself, because we are endlessly told that she is beloved beyond measure, while simultaneously being asked to excuse the fact that her work is rarely discussed, shared, debated, or remembered by the very audience she is supposedly adored by. And nowhere is this contradiction more visible than in the repeated rollout of projects that are introduced as life-defining missions destined to shape the nation, yet somehow fail to spark even the mildest ripple outside palace-controlled coverage, and the Early Childhood Initiative is often cited as her defining contribution. A serious intellectual endeavour meant to change how society understands development, empathy, and long-term well-being. And on paper it sounds important, worthy and deeply relevant, but in practice it exists largely as a concept rather than a lived conversation, because outside of press releases and obligatory praise, most people could not explain what it actually does, what has changed because of it, or why it should matter to them personally. And this is not because the topic lacks emotional weight, but because the delivery is so carefully sanitized, so cautiously neutral, and so distant from lived experience that it never quite lands. And the audience senses this distance, instinctively responding with indifference rather than opposition. Because indifference is what happens when something feels mandatory rather than meaningful, and it becomes increasingly laughable when commentators insist that Kate's popularity is unmatched, while quietly acknowledging that her initiatives struggle to hold attention. Because how does one reconcile being adored by millions with being largely ignored by those same millions, once the photo opportunity ends? And the answer seems to lie in the difference between being admired as an image and being engaged with as a person, because Kate's public presence is built around safety, predictability, and non-disruption, which works beautifully for maintaining an image but poorly for inspiring sustained interest. And this contrast becomes especially stark when placed beside Meghan, whose very existence appears to command attention, whether positive or negative. Because Meghan's projects rarely slip quietly into the background, they provoke conversation, analysis, praise, criticism, and debate, because they feel personal, intentional, and emotionally grounded. And the irony is almost comedic, because Meghan is often accused of being divisive, while Kate is praised for being uncontroversial. Yet controversy generates engagement and neutrality generates silence. And silence is precisely what greets most of Kate's work, once the initial media cycle moves on. And one could argue that being ignored is preferable to being criticized. But in terms of influence, relevance, and impact, being ignored is far more damaging, because it signals that the audience does not feel compelled to react at all. And this is the uncomfortable truth that palace narratives work over time to obscure by repeating the mantra of popularity, as if saying it often enough will make it measurable. And yet when Meghan posts about a project, whether it is a foundation initiative, a podcast, a product, or even an idea, the response is immediate and substantial, because people feel invited into a story rather than instructed to respect one. And that invitation is the key difference, because Meghan does not rely on assumed reverence. She builds connection through voice, vulnerability, and clarity of intent. And that clarity makes people feel something, and feeling something is what drives attention in a crowded media landscape. And this is where the satire sharpens, because critics often claim Meghan overshadows Kate, as if Meghan is actively stealing attention, rather than simply understanding how attention works. Because attention does not flow toward titles or tradition, it flows toward authenticity, narrative, and emotional relevance. And Kate's projects often feel like assignments carefully completed and then filed away, while Meghan's feel like extensions of her identity, whether one agrees with her or not. And the laughter grows louder when palace sources express confusion about why Kate's work does not resonate as expected, while continuing to deploy the same formula of vague language, minimal follow-through, and an almost allergic reaction to personality, because apparently the solution to being overlooked is to be even quieter, even safer, and even more restrained, and this restraint is praised as dignity, when in reality it reads as disengagement, and the public responds accordingly by disengaging in return. And the comparison becomes unavoidable when metrics of modern relevance are considered, because popularity today is not measured by how warmly one is spoken about in tabloids, but by how people interact, respond, and participate. And by that measure, Meghan consistently outpaces Kate, because Meghan's projects generate discussion that spills beyond curated channels into real conversation and cultural commentary, while Kate's remain largely confined to palace-approved spaces. And this disparity exposes the fragile illusion of universal adoration, because if someone were truly as beloved as claimed, their work would not require constant reminding. It would live naturally in the public consciousness, and the fact that it does not suggests that the affection described is more passive than active, more ceremonial than personal. And this is not necessarily a moral failing, but it is a reality that becomes absurd when contrasted with the insistence that Kate represents the pinnacle of influence and relevance, and the humour lies in watching commentators twist themselves into knots, trying to explain why someone so supposedly popular cannot generate organic interest in her initiatives, while someone painted as controversial can generate it effortlessly and repeatedly. And the answer is simple but inconvenient, because popularity that is built on being inoffensive does not translate into engagement. And engagement is what determines impact, and Meghan understands this intuitively by embracing specificity, emotion, and narrative, while Kate's approach avoids all three in favour of generalities that offend no one, but inspire no one either. And this avoidance is framed as strength, when in reality it limits connection, because people connect to stories, not statements, and to emotion, not obligation. And this is why Kate's projects often feel like they belong to an institution rather than to her as a person. And when projects feel institutional, audiences treat them as background noise rather than as invitations. And the result is a cycle of launch praise, disappearance, repeat that has become so predictable it borders on parody. And yet the narrative of unparalleled popularity persists largely unchallenged, because it is safer to maintain the myth than to confront the evidence. And the evidence is visible every time a Meghan project trends within hours, while a Kate initiative requires weeks of media reinforcement to achieve a fraction of the attention, and even then fades quickly. And this is often blamed on media bias or public unfairness, but rarely on the possibility that one approach simply resonates more deeply than the other, and the satire sharpens further when Meghan is criticised for monetizing influence or leveraging attention, while Kate's lack of engagement is framed as proof of purity, because apparently impact is suspicious, but invisibility is virtuous. And this upside-down logic collapses under scrutiny because causes do not benefit from being ignored, and influence unused is influence wasted, and the public seems increasingly aware of this contradiction, responding with attention where they feel seen, and with silence where they feel spoken at. And that is the core difference that no amount of image management can obscure. Because Meghan speaks from within experience, while Kate speaks from above it, and modern audiences have little patience for being talked down to, even gently and politely. And so the laughter continues as commentators insist that Kate's work will stand the test of time, while Meghan's is fleeting. When in reality time has shown that what endures is not caution, but connection, and connection requires risk, voice and emotional truth. And without those elements, even the most well-funded, well-promoted initiatives will drift into obscurity no matter how many supportive headlines accompany them. And the most amusing part of all is that this contrast is treated as mysterious when it is entirely logical, because attention follows authenticity. And Meghan's willingness to be visible, imperfect, and emotionally present creates a sense of immediacy that Kate's carefully managed neutrality simply cannot replicate. And this does not make one morally superior to the other, but it does make the insistence that Kate's popularity should naturally translate into impact increasingly untenable and comical. And so the cycle repeats with new projects, new photo ops, new praise, and the same quiet fade into irrelevance, while Meghan continues to generate reaction with minimal effort, simply by existing, engaging, and creating. And the audience watches this dynamic play out again and again, growing more aware that popularity as defined by palace narratives is not the same as relevance as measured by public response, and that being loved in theory is far less powerful than being engaged with in practice. And until that distinction is acknowledged, the situation will remain ripe for satire, because nothing is more laughable than being told to believe in influence that never quite shows up when it matters, and the scoreboard of engagement keeps flashing the same result, reminding everyone that attention is earned, not inherited. Relevance cannot be staged, and silence, no matter how polite, is not applause.